Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. Today we're already at episode 10 in the ongoing hashtag 2 years ago today CW series, which deals with the phone data review of the Chris Watts timeline in chronological order. So we're at July 6th, and what's quite interesting is in this particular entry, Shanann wants Watts to sort out the Vivint sensor, and she puts in all caps, "before I flip." And what's quite interesting in today's entry is we do have another photo of Shanann, and I'm sure you'll agree you get a much clearer sense of this chronology when you can sort of see Shanann at the same time as we go through it each day. Now, we might not have footage for every single day, but we can certainly get it for possibly most days. And we don't just get a picture of Shanann, sometimes there's a picture of the children and also a comment, and we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I want to extend a hand of gratitude just to say thank you to the 13,000 subscribers on this channel. Welcome. Thank you for being here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. You can ring the bell for notifications, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So in episode 10, we're dealing with something that is quite interesting within context. So if we bear in mind that Chris Watts and Shanann seem to have been arguing 2 days earlier, right? So July 4th. And then there have been a series of back and forth conversations that we don't know what they involved, right? And now we at July 6th with quite a lot of detail compared to certainly the previous day. And let's quickly go through that. July 6th at 07:48, Josh Rosenberg asked Chris Watts how bachelor life was going. Watts replied he was exercising a lot, working extra weekend shifts, and the time was going by fast. Now, if you read between the lines with that, of course, what he's not saying is that he was sexercising a lot with Kessinger and he was sort of doing extra weekend shifts that wasn't exactly work with a co-worker. I'm sure that the time was going by fast. I'm sure that is true. What I think is possibly quite interesting here is I have an idea that Josh Rosenberg didn't ask Watts because he was curious. I think he may have been sort of put up to it either by Shanann through Cassie, or Cassie had asked Josh to send him the message. I'm not certain that Josh would have sent the message willy-nilly, but it's possible. And the reason I say that is later on in the timeline, there's another sort of incident, and Josh then asks Watts a couple of questions, and one kind of gets an intuitive sense that he's doing it because of pressure, or he's being sort of asked to do it by his wife, and possibly via Shanann in some cases. So that's just a kind of interesting thing. It is true that Watts was exercising a lot, and I'm not sure if it's true that he was working extra weekend shifts. I'm not sure if that's true. If it is true, then, he was spending the weekend not at home, or less at home over weekends than he would normally be, and maybe he's trying to sort of cover for himself why he's busy. And it does have something to do with work. What is interesting here is, and I think this is something a lot of people miss that follow true crime or that are new to true crime, is that people don't want to lie. People feel that they need to lie, and so what they try to do is they try to tell as much of the truth as they can get away with. And it's also important to tell if you're going to tell a lie, tell it in a way that's plausible in the sense that it's connected to reality. So Watts saying that he's doing extra work and shifts is somewhat true. I'm just saying, instead of him saying, I'm working on the basement or something, it is true that he is involved more in a work scenario, if one can put it that way. Do you see what I'm getting at? I'm just saying it sort of comes more naturally, if you're going to lie about something that's somewhat connected to the truth or to reality. Around about 2 hours later, at 09:57, Shanann called Watts and held a 3-minute conversation. So at 10 o'clock, Shanann calls Watts, and so Shanann calls him after this message from Josh, and it's possible that Josh then let Cassie know what his response was, and Cassie then let Shanann know. In other words, how are you doing? Are you in a bad mood? Are you happy? Are you unhappy? And then he would just say, well, bachelor life was fine or whatever, and that he's exercising, and then Shanann would maybe feel, oh well, first of all, he's awake and he seems to be in okay mood, I'll call him. Then after that 3-minute conversation, she called back again, and then they had a 4-minute conversation. Now usually when you have a short conversation and then another conversation, that's usually a sign that things aren't going well. It's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you just forgot to say something. But in a situation where somebody ends up dead and where they've been arguing 2 days earlier, I think it's reasonable to assume that they were arguing. Now, we're going to get confirmation of that in a moment. So what I'm saying is not sort of plucking at straws. By the way, we're on Discovery page 2083, if you want to check it out yourself, of the phone data review. It's actually page, I think, 14 of the phone data review, but Discovery page 2083. Then in the afternoon, so around about 5-6 hours later, at 15:51, which is just before 10 to 4, Watts called Shanann and held an 11-minute conversation. So one kind of gets the idea that she called him and kind of asked him to sort certain things out, get certain things done, and kind of report back to him. And then 6 hours later, sort of at the end of the day, but fairly early in the afternoon, he calls her and they have an 11-minute conversation. Then almost an hour later, Shanann called Watts and had another 3-minute conversation. Then at around about 6:30, 18:35, Watts called Shanann and held a nearly 8-minute conversation. And then the final entry is at 18:52. Shortly before 7 o'clock, Shanann told Watts to call Vivint before I flip, in all caps. And what the impression I kind of get here is that at least for much of this day, Shanann has been bugging or prodding or complaining or talking about the Vivint sensor, and by the end of the day she tells him, you better call them before I lose it. So the impression one kind of gets is that he's been trying to fix it, or that he's been or maybe someone came out and went back and didn't fix it, and then he said, well, look, I'll try and sort it out. Now earlier I said, if you're going to tell a lie, you want to have it based somewhat on the truth, right? Now I think what is being discussed here is Shanann is concerned she's not at home, the kids aren't at home, and Watts is sometimes at work, and it's probably acknowledged by Watts that the garage sensor is sort of dodgy. It's sort of on the blink. It's not really working. And Shanann's probably kind of getting a sense that, well, since she's left home, she's not getting the kind of the regular kind of alerts from Vivint on her phone that she's used to, right? And Watts is trying to give her a plausible explanation for that the one sensor's broken or something. That's also something that it's unfortunate he wasn't asked about when he was interrogated, and also Kissinger wasn't really asked about that, what she knew about the Vivint sensor. Maybe she was, I just don't recall her talking about it much. Now, this is what I would imagine. I would imagine that Watts possibly intentionally damaged the garage sensor so that he would have a bit of leeway in the home sensors not being like a tattletale, recording and reporting all of his movements, right? The other thing to bear in mind, and I think this is quite interesting, and I'm not sure how many people have connected the dots on this. Shanann is obviously aware of the Vivint sensor thing on July 6th, right? Now, we know Kissinger went to the Watts home on July 4th. Did Shanann know about that? Did Shanann see Kissinger approaching on the Ring doorbell camera? Now, according to what we know, she arrived unannounced. She didn't say, I'm coming over. She just sort of arrived unannounced. Now, if that's the case, Watts may have panicked as well and felt he had to disable the sensors in case she did that again, because he would be in a world of trouble if Shanann saw that. So Watts probably did something on July 4th to kind of mitigate the communication, the kind of communication that could get him into trouble to Shanann from Vivint. One of them may have been the garage sensor, but it may have been other things as well. And by July 6th, Shanann is furious because it's still not sorted out. Now, do you think Chris Watts wants to sort out the sort of security net that's going to expose him? Well, the answer is no. So what he needs to do is sort of tell kind of a story where Shanann is going to gradually come to accept that there's some kind of unresolvable problem, which is going to allow Watts to sneak away from the house and back to the house without it always alerting her to his movements. Or he needs to find a way to do that with the net in place, with a working security net in place. Now, we know certainly by the end of this period that the garage sensor still wasn't working. And where does Watts sort of, what's the first thing he does after committing Shanann's murder? Well, he goes to the garage. And I don't think that's something he would normally do. He wouldn't normally go through the garage because that would wake the kids. And the truck wasn't usually parked on the driveway because that would wake the kids. And I think that's another aspect that for those in the majority, I think many people, if not most people, believe the cockamamie story that the children were murdered at the well site, or one of the children were murdered at the well site. So, you're going to kill your wife, and then you're going to take your child alive to the well site and sort of just deal with whatever they come up with. You're going to sort of deal with the crying and the shouting and the screaming and whatever, and who cares? Well, if that's what you think, you don't understand true crime, you don't understand how premeditated murder works, and you don't understand Chris Watts. He's an introverted, conservative, careful personality, a kind of a reserved person, and he wouldn't want a situation where it would also be a confrontation with his children. What is wrong with mommy? He would need to concentrate and keep all his ducks in a row while he was texting and speaking to his colleagues on the way to the well site. And for those who think that the children were alive, when we go through the phone data review dealing with that part, and you see all the texts and so on, and you imagine a child is sort of sitting there doing nothing, not being a distraction on his way to work. It's just absolutely absurd. But the basic point I want to make now is just that if the children weren't dead, then it would make no sense for Watts to pull the car up against the driveway. Not it wouldn't make any sense, but that would wake them up, and it would wake them up in a way that he wouldn't want to wake them up. So if they were sort of half asleep when he murdered Shanann, then if he did want to take them to the well site alive, he wouldn't really want to wake them up. He would want to carry them to the truck sort of in a still half asleep state so they could sort of sleep on if they were sleeping. I don't believe they would have been sleeping under the circumstances. I think they were expecting their mother to come home. When she didn't come home, if they were alive, they would have been very distressed, and you certainly wouldn't have a thing of people being seen in broad daylight walking on the driveway, or even carrying bodies on the driveway, or anything like that. I didn't really mean to go into that area, but it's just to do with this whole idea of him reversing the truck to the garage door with a dodgy sensor. Under usual circumstances would have woken the children because their window is directly above the garage, and Shanann actually forbade him to do that. She kind of had him park his work truck out in the road, not even on the driveway slab. And the reason for that was twofold: one, not to mess oil on the driveway, and the other one, not to make a noise when he got up early in the morning to go to work. And one does imagine that he wouldn't use the garage to open the door. He would use the front door normally, because it would be quieter. So if we go back to the very last entry in the phone data review for July 6th, it refers to Shanann saying, you better call Vivint before I flip, it's like she's kind of threatening him. You don't do this, I'm going to freak out and you're going to be sorry. And you kind of get the sense that she's used to sort of pushing a weight around, that he's the kind of guy who, if she says something in a forceful way, he will put his tail between his legs and kind of like a good little dog will do what he's told, kind of thing, right? That's just what the sense one gets from that. You don't actually get the sense that Watts would do the same thing, that he would say to her, if you don't do that, I'm going to freak out. It's sort of in a one-way direction. But the important part is Watts' response, and he says, they are sending a sensor for the garage door. I tried moving it like they said and it didn't work. So what he's admitting in that response is he's saying he's been in touch with Vivint. They gave him advice on how to fix it. He tried, but he failed, right? And then the aftermath to that, the result of that, what's going to happen next is that Vivint are going to send a sensor. Now, what Chris Watts can kind of claim, I guess, is that they've ordered a sensor, or that the sensors they're out of stock or something, and they're ordering a sensor and it's going to take another week or something, and so you can buy a little bit of time with that story. I highly doubt that he did call Vivint, and I highly doubt that he was going to really try to fix it for the next at least couple of weeks. But what is interesting is he's already figured out how to deal with Shanann. If Shanann's incredibly angry, he just tells her a lie, and she's got to sort of make do with that lie. She's got to kind of just accept what he's saying, because kind of her hands are tied, she's somewhere else. So he doesn't answer in an emotional way. He just sort of, he's kind of dismissive of her anger, just saying, speaking in a very flat response. I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. And but bear in mind that this is right at the end of the day, that he's still talking about trying to fix it and it didn't work. So that is going through the sort of individual entries. If we take a more broad look at the entry for July 6th, and if we look at it, the description on crimerocket2.com, then we get a little bit of a different contextual look. If we look at the number of phone calls and that kind of thing, and we're going to do that now. By the way, I will put in every episode, in the description, I'll put a link to these entries so that you can spend a bit of time looking at them if you want to, and look at the photos from Facebook if you want to. And there's often also a little bit of extra detail on the blog as well. So on July 6th, we get a peek at the sort of day-to-day chores they're discussing. Earlier in a previous episode, I said, what kind of things could they be discussing? What kind of, if Shanann is asking him to do stuff, like what kind of things could she be asking him? Well, this is it. The security of the house. And one can sort of sympathize with Shanann and say, if she'd put her foot down and she had flipped out and she had freaked out, she may be alive today. Meaning, if she demanded that he fix the sensor the next day or ASAP, and if it wasn't fixed, then she called them and made absolutely damn sure it was fixed, then he would have no option to, in terms of committing the murder, to rely on this dodgy sensor. Because when she disappeared and people were like, well, how could she have disappeared? He did mention that sensor, that was a possibility. So I said at the time when I posted this on July 6, 2019, one of the things on Shanann's mind is the dodgy security sensor at the garage door. Clearly this ongoing issue had gone from aggravating Shanann to infuriating her. Now, like I say, I've got an idea that it was at least an issue by July 4th when Kissinger came to visit, but it may even have been before that. So Shanann goes away, and while she's away, there's an issue with the dodgy security sensor, and now Shanann's getting angry, justifiably so. It's possible, even likely, that Watts purposefully damaged the sensor, as I mentioned earlier, or wanted it to remain on the blink, so that he could explain why the security system wasn't picking up his movements. Remember, he was spending a lot of time, almost every night, at Kissinger. So how did Shanann not know this? Either she wasn't getting the Vivint alerts to begin with, or she wasn't being alerted because of an intentionally erratic sensor. Now, one thing that sometimes happens with an erratic sensor is it sets the alarm off, right? And so what happens in that situation is you can kind of justifiably say, well, look, I'm going to need to turn off the system because it's misfiring. It's sending, it's going off by accident. So I'm going to turn the whole system off. And that is possibly what he said to Shanann, that look, this sensor's whatever, and I'm gonna turn it off until it's fixed, or something like that. And that's obviously not a long-term solution. You can't just have your home security system off, right? Also bear in mind that it appears that Watts, when he slept at Kissinger, he didn't park his work truck outside her home, because if he did that, it would have alerted his supervisor. His truck is GPS tracked, and he's only allowed to go to work sites and home. He's not really even allowed to drop the kids off or take any passengers in his truck. So he was going to need to open the garage door almost every day to let out the Lexus, so he could take the Lexus when he went to Kissinger. So he would arrive home, park the truck outside his home, so that would fool Anadarko or keep Anadarko happy, but it would also kind of fool the neighbors that he was spending, his truck's parked there, so he must be home. Except he would then leave in the Lexus and go and stay at Kessinger. But it was important when he left in the Lexus in the morning, in the evening, and so he'd leave after arriving back from work in the evening or in the afternoon, and then he'd come back after the night at Kessinger to pick up his work truck. And all of those things would sort of set off the garage sensor, because you would have to park the Lexus into the garage, right? So you would need that sensor not to work. You wouldn't necessarily need to go further into the house. You would just need to park it in the garage and then go back out again. And this seems to have been also this early way of fooling both Shanann, and not fooling Anadarko, but sort of not causing any problems with Anadarko, probably played into how he decided to commit the murder. Is also through the same sort of thing, is hide it within the signals that are signaling, if that makes sense. Not going to go into that in any more detail, but I think you know what I'm kind of getting at. If the other possibility is that Watts was deliberately frustrating Shanann's efforts to track his movements into and out of the house and getting away with it. Watts may have developed the confidence that he could pull the wool over everyone's eyes in a more serious scenario if it came to that. On July 6th, Shanann calls Watts 4 times and Watts calls her 3 times. Total chatting time on the 6th, approximately half an hour. The tone of Shanann's all caps "before I flip" suggests she was shouting at him, this is in those phone calls, while giving him orders from North Carolina. Exactly a month later, she would experience him as a different man, non-communicative, dissociated and cold, and she'd sort of be like, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know this guy. I don't know what is wrong with him. I don't understand. Please talk to me, kind of thing. So in the photo that we see of Shanann and Bella, Shanann looks at first glance to be quite happy, and she writes, picking up pizza with B, that's Bella, don't mind the shiny face, it's hot out. And so Shanann's getting pizza, and Bella's got a cute smile, but it doesn't seem particularly, it's not like a spontaneously happy smile, but children often do smile like that. When you look at Shanann's smile, as I said, at face value, she looks kind of happy, but there's a little bit of almost like forcefulness, especially when you look at her eyes, especially her left eye. And that's not making an inference, because we know things weren't going well. She's arguing with her husband. She's upset with him. She's kind of making forceful demands. So, and I think Chris Watts was giving her the runaround. So Shanann had every right to feel upset, angry, frustrated, and not particularly happy with her husband. But of course on Facebook she looks like she's happy. We also get a glimpse of what sort of food she feels is appropriate for her children, as opposed to ice cream with nuts. Now, that's not necessarily a criticism. People buy pizza all the time. But I think the more pertinent point is that while she's eating pizza, what is Chris Watts doing? That's not the kind of food that he wants to eat. And so you can kind of imagine when they kind of live together, Chris Watts is starting to eat his own meals, cook his own meals. And that was also creating a kind of a separation. You and the kids, you eat your kind of food. I'm going to eat different kind of food. And it's unfortunate. Shanann could have possibly sort of cottoned on to what Watts was doing and also eaten the same kind of food, and maybe that would have softened Watts's hardening heart. I don't know. I'm talking about when they were together. It's likely Shanann bought pizza on her way to or from her in-laws in Vass Road. There's a pizzeria just around the corner. So it looks like she may have gone to the Watts clan, and maybe she went to Brooklyn Pizzeria. And the reason why I say that is just because her Facebook is sort of geo-mapped to Brooklyn Pizzeria, and there's a Brooklyn Pizzeria right beside Vass Road. So I'm sure you'll agree that there's so much information that one can get out of a review of the chronology. I've gotten a couple of comments from people saying, oh, we've been through this before, haven't we? And don't we know everything by now? Well, no, we don't. And True Crime Rocket Science never rests because we can never know everything. And having that attitude means we will know a lot. When you take the attitude that I think I know everything, or I think I know what happened, you're going into dangerous territory because you probably don't know. But when you take the attitude that you can always know more, then you're probably going to find your way, if not to the finish line, then very, very close to it. And I believe True Crime Rocket Science has achieved that in many, many ways, many areas in the Chris Watts story. I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the next episode in this series, and that'll be episode 11, dealing with July 7th. On Patreon, I put up a long episode on reviewing the Dateline documentary on Laurie Vallow, what happened to JJ and Tylee, and that's about an hour-long episode on Patreon. I think it's on the $2 tier. So if you're interested in coverage of that case, check that out. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.